For thousands of years, the people of ancient Egypt lived in a world infused with divine presence, where the rising of the sun, the flooding of the Nile, and even the fate of their souls after death were all explained through an elaborate system of gods, myths, and sacred rituals. To the Egyptians, religion was not something separate from daily life. It was life itself, woven into every harvest, every offering, and every prayer uttered within the towering walls of their temples. They believed the gods were not distant, abstract figures, but living beings who walked among them in the form of animals, natural forces, and, most importantly, through the person of the pharaoh, who was considered a divine intermediary between heaven and earth. This belief system, developed over millennia, became one of the most complex and enduring mythologies of the ancient world, and it shaped Egyptian culture in ways that still captivate historians and archaeologists today. At the center of Egyptian religion was a pantheon of gods whose roles often overlapped yet reflected the values and concerns of society. Each god represented not just power but an essential aspect of life and the natural order. Ra, the sun god, whose daily journey across the sky symbolized creation and renewal. Osiris, lord of the underworld, who embodied death, resurrection, and eternal justice. Isis, his devoted wife, the goddess of magic and motherhood, who protected kings and commoners alike, and Horus, their son, the falcon, headed god of kingship, whose eye became one of the most powerful symbols of protection in Egyptian art and culture. But Egyptian mythology did not remain static. It evolved over time, blending local traditions with state religion, absorbing foreign influences, and shifting depending on which city or dynasty held power. In Memphis, the creator god Ptah was honored as the master craftsman who spoke the world into existence, while in Thebes, Ammon rose from a local god to supreme creator, eventually merging with Ra to form Ammon-Ra, king of the gods. This fluidity allowed Egyptian religion to adapt and endure for over 3,000 years. Even as dynasties rose and fell, foreign rulers came and went, and cultural priorities shifted. Yet beyond the grand temples and state rituals, mythology permeated the ordinary lives of Egyptians. Farmers prayed to Hapi, the god of the Nile, for the life, giving floods that ensured their crops. Mothers sought the protection of Taweret, the hippo-shaped goddess of childbirth, to safeguard their children. In villages, people carried amulets inscribed with the eye of Horus or the scarab beetle, believing these objects had the power to ward off illness, misfortune, or evil spirits. The myths were not just tales but moral guides, shaping behavior, reinforcing the order of the cosmos, and reminding Egyptians of their place within the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. One of the most famous and deeply influential myths was the story of Osiris, Isis, and Horus. In this tale, Osiris was murdered by his jealous brother Set, who represented chaos and disorder. Isis, using her magical powers and boundless devotion, reassembled Osiris's body and breathed life back into him, making him ruler of the afterlife. Their son, Horus, grew up to avenge his father, battling Set for control of Egypt and ultimately triumphing, thus securing the throne for himself and his descendants. This myth became the foundation of Egyptian kingship, with every pharaoh seen as the living Horus and every deceased king identified with Osiris. It reinforced the idea that order could overcome chaos, and that death was not the end but a transformation leading to eternal life. For the Egyptians, these stories explained not only the workings of the universe, but also offered reassurance against the uncertainties of existence. To understand their gods and mythology is to glimpse the heart of ancient Egypt itself, a civilization that sought meaning, justice, and continuity in a world that often seemed unpredictable. Their myths gave structure to the cosmos, sanctity to the state, and comfort to the individual, ensuring that life, no matter how fleeting, was part of a grander eternal cycle overseen by divine powers. Among the vast Egyptian pantheon, few deities held as much importance or universal reverence as Ra, the sun god, whose blazing disk illuminated the heavens and whose daily journey across the sky became one of the most enduring symbols of creation, life, and rebirth. To the Egyptians, the rising of the sun was not merely a natural event, but a divine act that renewed the world each day, banishing darkness and chaos, and restoring the principle of truth, balance, and cosmic order that was central to their world. Ra was depicted most often as a man with the head of a falcon, crowned with the solar disk encircled by a protective cobra, a striking image that conveyed both majesty and danger. Each morning, Egyptians believed Ra was born anew in the east, rising from the horizon to bring light to the world. And as he journeyed across the sky in his solar bark, he watched over creation, sustaining gods, humans, and the natural order alike. By evening, Ra aged as he descended in the west, symbolizing the cycle of life and death, before entering the underworld, where he would travel through the dangerous night accompanied by protective gods, battling serpents and forces of chaos until he emerged victorious at dawn. This cycle of death and rebirth made Ra not only a solar deity, but a cosmic figure whose existence represented the eternal renewal of all life. His myths often intertwine with creation itself, particularly in the Heliopolitan theology of the city of Heliopolis, where priests proclaimed Ra as the first god who emerged from the primeval waters of Nun, the chaotic void that existed before creation. In this myth, Ra created himself, then gave birth to the first divine pair, Shu, god of air, and Tefnut, goddess of moisture, who in turn produced Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. From their children came Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys, forming the Ennead of Heliopolis, the great family of 9 gods that became the foundation of much of Egyptian mythology. Through this theological framework, Ra was not just the sun but the source of all divine power, the origin of gods and humans alike, a figure whose creative energy shaped the cosmos. Yet, over the centuries, Ra's worship expanded and adapted as other cults gained prominence. In Thebes, when Ammon rose to supremacy as the hidden creator god, his priests merged him with Ra to form Ammon-Ra, a deity of unparalleled might who combined the invisibility of the mysterious Ammon with the radiant presence of Ra. This synthesis allowed Ra's mythology to endure and evolve, keeping him at the center of Egyptian religion even as political power shifted. Beyond temples and theology, Ra's presence was also a daily part of ordinary Egyptian lives. Farmers rising at dawn to work their fields saw Ra's return as both a literal and spiritual blessing, while prayers for his protection were offered by sailors traveling the Nile under his light. The pharaoh himself was often described as the son of Ra, a title that connected royal power directly to the sun god, reinforcing the divine legitimacy of kingship. Monumental temples and obelisks were constructed to honor Ra, their architectural designs aligned with the rising and setting sun, ensuring that his eternal cycle was reflected in stone. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Ra's mythology lies in his nightly journey through the underworld, a perilous voyage that represented not only the struggles of the sun, but the fate of every soul after death. Each night, Ra sailed through 12 regions of darkness, facing threats from demons and, most notably, the monstrous serpent Apophis, embodiment of chaos, who sought to devour the sun and plunge the world into eternal night. Assisted by protective gods like Set, Mehin, and other divine guardians, Ra triumphed each night, proving that order and light could always overcome darkness. This myth reassured Egyptians that death was not final, that like Ra, their souls too could journey through danger, overcome chaos, and emerge reborn into eternity. His mythology provided a framework not only for understanding the cosmos, but for navigating the greatest of all human fears, the unknown that follows death. In every sunrise, Egyptians saw the proof that their gods were victorious, and in every sunset, they recognized the beginning of a sacred journey that promised renewal. For modern audiences, the story of Ra reveals the depth of Egyptian spirituality and their ability to weave natural phenomena into a grand cosmic narrative. To the Egyptians, the sun was not just a light in the sky. It was a god, a creator, and a protector whose eternal cycle mirrored the human quest for meaning, resilience, and hope. No myth in Egyptian history carried more weight or touched more aspects of life and death than the story of Osiris, Isis, and Horus. A tale that blended love, betrayal, vengeance, and resurrection into a narrative that became the backbone of Egyptian religion. To the ancient Egyptians, this was not just a myth. It was the explanation of why the Nile flooded, why kings ruled, why death could be conquered, and why justice always triumphed over chaos. According to the legend, Osiris was a wise and beloved king who brought civilization, law, and agriculture to Egypt. But his brother Set, consumed by jealousy and anger, plotted his downfall. In one of the most dramatic stories of the ancient world, Set tricked Osiris into laying in a beautifully decorated chest, slammed the lid shut, and threw it into the Nile, where it drifted away before being discovered in a foreign land. Grief-stricken, Isis, Osiris's devoted wife and sister, scoured the earth to find her husband's body, and after retrieving it, she hid it away in Egypt. Yet Set discovered the corpse, hacked it into pieces, and scattered them across the land. Refusing to surrender to despair, Isis embarked on a quest to recover each fragment of Osiris's body. Aided by her sister Nephthys and guided by her unmatched magical abilities. Piece by piece, she reassembled Osiris, wrapping him in linen and restoring him through rituals that would become the foundation of Egyptian mummification. Though Osiris could no longer rule among the living, Isis's power revived him as the god of the afterlife, ruler of the underworld, and judge of the dead. This transformation gave Egyptians a profound hope that death was not the end, but a passage to another realm where Osiris presided over eternal life. From their union came Horus, the falcon, headed god destined to avenge his father. Raised in secrecy to protect him from Set's wrath, Horus grew into a powerful figure who challenged his uncle for the throne of Egypt. Their battles, often described as violent contests of strength and cunning, symbolized the eternal struggle between order and chaos. In the end, Horus triumphed, restoring stability and justice to Egypt, and the pharaohs who followed were seen as his living embodiments. Every king became Horus on earth, and in death, each pharaoh became Osiris, reinforcing the eternal cycle of divine kingship. This myth explained and legitimized the rule of Egypt's monarchs while giving ordinary people comfort in the promise of resurrection. Beyond its political and religious significance, the Osiris myth resonated with Egyptians on a deeply personal level. The annual flooding of the Nile, which nourished their crops, was linked to Osiris's death and rebirth, as his body was believed to bring fertility to the land. Isis, meanwhile, became a model of devotion, motherhood, and magical protection. Her image invoked in prayers by women seeking to protect their children or heal their families. Horus's eye, which was injured during his battles with Set and later healed, became a powerful amulet symbolizing protection, restoration, and health, one of the most recognizable icons in Egyptian culture, carried by sailors, soldiers, and farmers alike. The myth also established powerful lessons about morality and cosmic order. Set represented Isfet, chaos and selfish ambition, while Osiris and Horus embodied Maat, truth, justice, and rightful rule. The conflict between them reminded Egyptians that chaos was always threatening the balance of the world. But with devotion, justice, and divine power, order would always prevail. Even in the afterlife, this myth echoed powerfully. Egyptians believed that upon death, their hearts would be weighed against the feather of Maat in the hall of Osiris. If their deeds aligned with truth and justice, they would join Osiris in eternal life. If not, their souls would be devoured by Ammit, the fearsome eater of the dead. Thus, the story of Osiris was not simply about gods and kings. It was about every human being's journey, their struggle against chaos, their hope for resurrection, and their place in the cosmic order. For modern audiences, the myth stands as one of the great epics of human imagination, rivaling the dramas of Greece or the sagas of Mesopotamia, yet uniquely Egyptian in its focus on eternal cycles, the power of family, and the promise of life after death. To the Egyptians, the story of Osiris, Isis, and Horus was not a fable, but a living truth that explained their world, legitimized their rulers, and promised them that even in death, they were not abandoned. Instead, they were part of a divine story that had begun in the time of the gods and would continue for all eternity. If there was one aspect of Egyptian religion that fascinated, comforted, and terrified people all at once, it was their vision of the afterlife, a journey into the Duat, the mysterious underworld. Unlike the modern Western idea of heaven and hell, the Egyptian afterlife was not a place of permanent reward or punishment alone, but a realm filled with trials, gates, guardians, and divine judges that the soul had to navigate successfully in order to find eternal peace. To the Egyptians, death was never seen as the end of existence, but rather a continuation of life on another plane, one that required preparation, knowledge, and divine favor. The Duat itself was often depicted as a vast, shadowy landscape beneath the earth, filled with rivers, mountains, deserts, and terrifying creatures. At night, even the sun god Ra was believed to travel through this realm in his solar bark, fighting monstrous serpents like Apophis, who tried to devour the sun and plunge the cosmos into chaos. The journey of the human soul mirrored this divine voyage. Upon death, the soul, called the Ba, separated from the body but retained its identity, emotions, and character. To survive in the afterlife, the Ba needed to reunite each night with the body, which is why mummification and tomb preservation were so crucial. Without a physical vessel, the soul risked dissolution, wandering restlessly without ever reaching the eternal fields of paradise. The most famous guidebook for this perilous journey was what modern scholars call the Book of the Dead, though the Egyptians themselves called it the Book of Coming Forth by Day. These collections of spells, prayers, and instructions were not standardized but tailored for each individual, written on papyrus and buried with the deceased. They contain the knowledge needed to bypass gates, recite passwords, and invoke protective deities when confronted by demons or hostile spirits in the Duat. A soul equipped with these texts could transform into animals, breathe air, and avoid being trapped or destroyed. Some spells even allowed the deceased to claim food and drink in the afterlife, ensuring that hunger and thirst would never plague them. Yet the most pivotal moment of the journey came in the Hall of Judgment, presided over by Osiris himself. Here, the heart of the deceased, believed to record every thought, word, and deed of one's life, was weighed on a scale against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. Standing nearby were the gods Thoth, who recorded the verdict, and Anubis, the jackal, headed god of mummification and protector of souls. If the heart was balanced, the soul was declared true of voice, and allowed to join Osiris in the blessed afterlife. But if the heart was heavy with sin, it was tossed to the monstrous Ammit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, who devoured it instantly, erasing the soul forever. For the Egyptians, this prospect of annihilation was far more terrifying than eternal punishment. It meant the total end of existence. For those who passed the test, eternal life awaited in the field of reeds, a paradise that mirrored Egypt itself, with fertile lands, flowing rivers, and endless crops. There, the deceased could reunite with family, enjoy pleasures they loved in life, and live under the benevolent rule of Osiris. This vision of eternity was not just spiritual, it was deeply practical and relatable. Egyptians imagined themselves plowing fields, fishing, or feasting with loved ones, a continuation of the best aspects of earthly existence, but without pain, hunger, or death. Importantly, the Egyptians believed that ordinary people could achieve this paradise, not only kings or priests. With the right preparation, mummification, proper tomb goods, and the knowledge of sacred texts, any person could be justified and find eternal peace. This democratization of the afterlife marked a profound shift in Egyptian religion over time, showing how mythology evolved to give hope and purpose to all levels of society. The underworld mythos also reinforced the importance of morality in daily life. Living in harmony with truth, balance, and justice was not just about avoiding earthly punishment, but about ensuring survival after death. Acts of kindness, honesty, and piety could quite literally determine whether one's heart would balance on the scales. For modern audiences, the Egyptian vision of the afterlife is both haunting and inspiring. It reveals a culture that valued justice, order, and continuity, and that saw death not as a grim finality, but as part of a grand cosmic cycle. Their mythology gave them hope, discipline, and a sense that every action mattered in the eternal scheme of things. In this way, the Egyptian afterlife was not just a destination, but a reflection of life itself, a journey of trials, choices, and ultimate renewal under the watchful eyes of the gods. In the pantheon of Egyptian deities, few were as universally revered and central to the cosmic order as Ra, the sun god. To the ancient Egyptians, Ra was not merely a celestial body that rose each morning and set at night, but the embodiment of life itself, the divine force that illuminated the world, nourished crops, and sustained the rhythms of time. His daily journey across the sky in his golden bark was seen as both a cosmic blessing and an eternal struggle, for Ra's voyage was never without danger. Each morning, his rebirth in the eastern horizon symbolized renewal, hope, and the triumph of light over darkness. Yet with every sunset, the god descended into the Duat, the underworld, where he faced challenges from spirits, serpents, and forces of chaos that sought to extinguish his light forever. The most feared of these was Apophis, a colossal serpent of pure disorder, who lay in wait to devour Ra's solar bark and plunge the universe into eternal night. The Egyptians understood this battle not as a myth locked in the past, but as an ongoing cosmic drama that unfolded every single night, one that determined the survival of the world. The myth of Ra carried profound philosophical and religious meaning for Egyptian society. It explained the very cycle of day and night, life and death, order and chaos. By personifying the sun's journey as a divine act of courage, Egyptians saw their own struggles reflected in the god's perseverance. Just as Ra fought against darkness, so too did humanity need to maintain balance against the forces of chaos in daily life. Priests played a vital role in this divine drama, performing elaborate rituals at temples dedicated to Ra, especially in the great solar temples of Heliopolis, where his worship originated. They recited protective spells, burned offerings, and conducted symbolic acts to aid Ra in his nightly battle. Ordinary Egyptians, too, internalized these beliefs, rising each dawn with prayers of gratitude for Ra's victory and living their lives in harmony with Maat, the principle of order and truth that Ra upheld. Without his light, crops would wither, rivers would stagnate, and society itself would collapse. So his triumph was not only mythological but essential for survival. Interestingly, Ra's mythology evolved over time, intertwining with other powerful gods to reflect the shifting priorities of Egyptian religion. One of the most significant of these fusions was with Amun, a local Theban deity who rose to prominence during the New Kingdom. Together, they formed Amun-Ra, a god who represented not just the visible sun, but hidden power, unseen yet all-encompassing. This merging symbolized Egypt's ability to integrate local traditions into a broader, unified belief system, strengthening political and religious cohesion. Another fusion occurred with Horus, the sky god, creating Ra-Horakhti, or Ra of the horizon, emphasizing the god's role as the eternal source of kingship and divine authority. These adaptations reflected the Egyptians' dynamic view of religion, one that could evolve yet always centered on the enduring truth of Ra's supremacy. Ra's influence was not confined to the heavens alone. He was deeply tied to the very notion of kingship. Pharaohs were often described as sons of Ra, earthly embodiments of his divine authority. By linking themselves to the sun god, rulers justified their power as both natural and eternal, a cosmic mandate to govern in harmony with man. Grand monuments, such as obelisks, with their tall, tapering forms, were constructed to symbolize rays of the sun and served as enduring tributes to Ra's life, giving presence. Even the Great Pyramids, oriented with remarkable precision to the cardinal points, carried solar symbolism, their shape echoing the rays descending from the sun. This deep connection between Ra, the cosmos, and royal power reinforced the unity of religion and governance in ancient Egypt. For modern audiences, Ra's mythology offers a striking perspective on how ancient cultures understood their place in the universe. The Egyptians saw life not as a static condition, but as a perpetual battle against forces that threatened stability. Ra's nightly voyage into the Duat embodied the human struggle against adversity, reminding people that order and renewal required vigilance, courage, and faith. The belief that every sunrise was proof of victory imbued daily existence with gratitude and awe. In today's terms, one might see Ra as a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, light can return with persistence and strength. Ultimately, Ra was more than a sun god. He was the heartbeat of Egyptian spirituality, the eternal guardian of life's balance, and the divine warrior whose endless journey ensured the world would never fall into chaos. Through his myth, the Egyptians articulated their deepest fears and highest hopes, embedding the cycles of nature into a grand cosmic narrative that still resonates thousands of years later. Among the countless tales of Egyptian mythology, few stories carried as much weight, influence, and spiritual depth as the myth of Osiris, Isis, and Horus. Narrative that not only shaped Egyptian religion, but also influenced later cultures across the Mediterranean. At the heart of this myth lies Osiris, the benevolent king and god of the afterlife, whose rule brought peace and prosperity to Egypt. Unlike other deities who symbolized natural forces, Osiris embodied civilization itself, teaching humans agriculture, law, and order. His reign represented an ideal world where harmony and justice thrived under Maat. Yet, this golden age was violently disrupted by betrayal, when Osiris's jealous brother Set, the embodiment of chaos and destruction, plotted to seize power. Through cunning deceit, Set tricked Osiris into lying in a beautifully crafted chest, slammed the lid shut, and cast it into the Nile, sealing his brother's fate. What followed was not just a tale of sibling rivalry, but a cosmic struggle between order and chaos that reverberated through Egyptian religion for millennia. The grief of Isis, Osiris's devoted wife and one of the most powerful goddesses in the Egyptian pantheon, became the emotional core of this myth. Isis was not simply a passive mourner, she was portrayed as a figure of relentless determination and magical prowess. Traversing the land in search of her husband's body, she embodied loyalty, resilience, and love in the face of despair. With the help of her sister Nephthys and the wisdom of Thoth, Isis eventually recovered Osiris's body. Yet Set's cruelty did not end there. He dismembered Osiris into 14 pieces and scattered them across Egypt. This gruesome act symbolized not only the violence of chaos, but also the fragility of order in the human world. Undeterred, Isis undertook an even greater quest, gathering each piece and reassembling her husband, using her extraordinary magic to breathe life into him once more. This act of resurrection became one of the most profound elements of Egyptian mythology, offering humanity a vision of hope beyond death. Though Osiris could not return to rule the living, he was reborn as the ruler of the Duat, the afterlife, where he presided as judge over the souls of the departed. His resurrection established him as a symbol of eternal life and renewal, assuring Egyptians that death was not the end, but a passage into another form of existence. To the ancient mind, Osiris's triumph over death offered comfort and stability, turning funerary rituals into acts of participation in this cosmic drama. Every burial, every mummification, and every prayer to Osiris was infused with the belief that the deceased, too, could share in his resurrection and live eternally in the afterlife. Isis, meanwhile, emerged as one of the most beloved and widely worshipped deities, embodying maternal devotion, magic, and protection. Her story with Osiris did not end with his resurrection. Through her union with him, she conceived Horus, the falcon-headed god destined to avenge his father and reclaim Egypt from Set. Horus's battles against Set were depicted as a series of epic struggles, representing the ongoing conflict between order and chaos. Ultimately, Horus triumphed, restoring balance to the world and assuming the throne as the rightful king. This victory was more than a mythic tale. It provided the foundation for the pharaoh's role in Egyptian society. Each ruler of Egypt was seen as the living Horus, embodying divine kingship and ensuring that the forces of disorder were kept at bay. The myth of Osiris, Isis, and Horus thus served multiple layers of Egyptian life. Spiritually, it offered assurance of life after death, a central concern in Egyptian religion that influenced the elaborate tombs, pyramids, and burial practices we marvel at today. Politically, it justified the rule of the pharaohs, linking their authority directly to the gods. Emotionally, it resonated with universal themes of loss, love, revenge, and redemption, making it accessible to both priests and ordinary Egyptians alike. Its influence spread far beyond Egypt, reaching into Greek and Roman traditions, where Isis became a widely venerated goddess across the Mediterranean world. Her cult endured for centuries, even rivaling early Christianity in its scope and devotion. For modern audiences, this myth continues to fascinate because it touches on questions that remain timeless. What happens after death? How do we confront betrayal and chaos? What role does love play in healing and renewal? The story of Osiris and Isis answers these questions with a narrative that is both deeply human and profoundly cosmic. It reminds us that even in the face of dismemberment, literal or symbolic order can be restored, life can continue, and hope can endure. Ultimately, the myth of Osiris and Isis was more than a tale told by the fireside. It was the beating heart of Egyptian religion, shaping rituals, inspiring art, and defining kingship. Its power lay in its ability to connect cosmic forces with human emotions, making it one of the most enduring and meaningful myths of the ancient world. The mythology of Horus stood at the very center of Egyptian kingship, making him one of the most significant figures in the pantheon. Represented as a falcon or a man with a falcon's head, Horus embodied the sky itself, his right eye symbolizing the sun and his left eye the moon. But more than just a celestial deity, Horus was the living embodiment of rightful kingship. The eternal ruler, whose victories over Set became a model for earthly pharaohs. His story was not simply about avenging his father Osiris. It was a narrative that justified the authority of every pharaoh who ever sat on Egypt's throne. For Egyptians, the coronation of a new king was not merely a political transition. It was the moment when the living Horus assumed power to maintain Ma'at, the cosmic balance of truth and order, against the ever-looming threat of chaos. The battles between Horus and Set were told in countless variations, but the underlying theme was always the same. Order must prevail over disorder, justice over treachery. In some versions, the two gods engaged in direct combat, their struggle lasting years and spanning both the heavens and the earth. Horus, as the rightful heir of Osiris, sought to claim his place as ruler, while Set, the god of storms, deserts, and violence, fought to maintain his usurpation. Their contest was not only physical but legal as well, with the gods convening to judge their dispute in a celestial tribunal. These stories mirrored the Egyptian world, where kingship was not merely a matter of power, but of legitimacy rooted in divine approval. For Egyptians, Horus's eventual triumph symbolized the eternal promise that rightful rule, grounded in justice and divine will, would always overcome tyranny and chaos. Horus's association with kingship became deeply woven into the fabric of Egyptian governance. Each pharaoh was seen as the living Horus on earth, a god, king who ruled not simply as a mortal but as the embodiment of divine order. In their names, titles, and iconography, pharaohs proclaimed this connection, often adopting the Horus name as part of their royal titulary. Statues and reliefs depicted them with falcon imagery, while temples frequently portrayed pharaohs standing beside Horus to emphasize their divine legitimacy. When Egyptians bowed to their ruler, they were not only honoring a man but participating in a cosmic system where the pharaoh functioned as the intermediary between the gods and humanity. Without this divine figure, the balance of Ma'at could not be upheld, and the world would collapse into chaos. The myth also explained the symbolic role of the Eye of Horus, a powerful amulet and religious icon. According to the stories, Horus lost his eye in battle with Set, but it was later restored by the god Thoth. The restored eye, known as the Wedjat, came to represent healing, protection, and wholeness. Egyptians wore amulets of the Eye of Horus to ward off evil, buried them with the dead to ensure safe passage to the afterlife, and carved them into sacred spaces to invoke divine guardianship. Its symbolism extended beyond personal protection to embody the resilience of the kingdom itself. Just as Horus's eye had been broken and healed, so too could Egypt endure trials and emerge renewed, guided by the divine order. For the common Egyptian, Horus's mythology was not a distant legend but a lived reality. The success of the Nile's flooding, the prosperity of harvests, and the security of Egypt's borders were all linked to the pharaoh's ability to channel Horus's power and keep Set's chaos at bay. Rituals, festivals, and temple ceremonies reinforced this connection, bringing people into direct participation with the myth. In the Great Temple at Edfu, for instance, annual reenactments of the battles between Horus and Set dramatized the eternal struggle between order and disorder, reminding all who attended that the stability of Egypt depended on their king's divine role as Horus incarnate. These festivals were more than religious pageantry. They were affirmations of national unity and cosmic stability, anchoring the daily lives of Egyptians in the certainty of divine oversight. For modern audiences, the story of Horus provides insight into how ancient societies blended politics, religion, and mythology into one seamless world view. Unlike today, where secular governance is often separated from religious belief, in Egypt the two were inseparable. To question the pharaoh's authority was not simply rebellion. It was sacrilege, a threat to the very order of the universe. This integration of divine myth and political reality gave Egypt one of the longest, lasting civilizations in history, with stability that endured for millennia. It also reveals how mythology can serve as a powerful tool for shaping collective identity and legitimizing authority. Ultimately, Horus was not just a falcon god watching from the skies. He was the eternal symbol of kingship, the divine protector of Egypt, and the cosmic force that ensured order would always triumph over chaos. His mythology gave the Egyptians a framework to understand the nature of power, the purpose of kingship, and the hope that, no matter the challenges, balance and justice would always be restored. If the myths of Ra, Osiris, and Horus explained the cycles of the sun and kingship on earth, then the Egyptian vision of the afterlife revealed how deeply their religion was tied to questions of morality, judgment, and eternal destiny. To the ancient Egyptians, death was not the end but the beginning of a perilous journey through the Duat, the underworld, where the soul would face trials, transformations, and the final reckoning before Osiris, Lord of the Dead. The afterlife was not granted automatically. It had to be earned through righteous living, adherence to Maat, and the proper performance of rituals. In this way, Egyptian mythology linked cosmic balance with personal morality, embedding every individual's fate within the same divine framework that governed kings and gods alike. At the heart of this belief system was the iconic weighing of the heart ceremony, a vision of judgment that remains one of the most powerful religious images from antiquity. According to the Book of the Dead, the deceased's heart, believed to hold the essence of one's character and deeds, was placed on a scale opposite the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and order. Thoth, the god of wisdom, recorded the outcome, while Anubis, the jackal, headed guardian of the dead, carefully conducted the weighing. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the soul was deemed pure and granted entry into the field of reeds, a paradise where the deceased lived eternally among fertile fields, flowing waters, and joyous reunions with loved ones. But if the heart was heavy with wrongdoing, it was devoured by the monstrous Ammit, a terrifying creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. For Egyptians, this was true annihilation, not eternal torment, but the total erasure of existence, a fate feared above all else. This vision of judgment revealed an ethical dimension in Egyptian religion that extended beyond simple ritual. The gods were not distant beings unconcerned with human actions. They were active arbiters of morality, ensuring that justice and truth prevailed not only in this life but in the next. The concept of Maat, upheld by Ra in the heavens and Horus on earth, was also expected of every Egyptian, from pharaoh to farmer. To speak truth, act justly, and respect both the gods and fellow humans was to align oneself with cosmic order. In this sense, Egyptian mythology created a moral universe where every individual had agency and responsibility, reinforcing social harmony while also offering hope for eternal life. The rituals surrounding death and burial were designed to assist the deceased in navigating this perilous journey. Elaborate tombs, like those in the Valley of the Kings, were more than monuments to wealth. They were carefully designed portals into the afterlife, filled with protective spells, sacred texts, and goods the deceased would need in eternity. The practice of mummification, perfected over centuries, was rooted in the belief that preserving the body ensured the survival of the soul. Coffins were painted with magical inscriptions, and amulets, such as the Eye of Horus, were placed with the mummy to ward off evil. The Book of the Dead, often buried with the deceased, functioned as a guidebook filled with spells, instructions, and prayers to help the soul navigate the dangers of the Duat and reach the judgment hall of Osiris. The Egyptian vision of paradise, known as the Field of Reeds, reflected their deep connection to the Nile and agricultural life. It was depicted as a perfected version of Egypt itself, fertile, abundant, and free of suffering. There, souls could plow fields without exhaustion, fish in eternal rivers, and enjoy a life of harmony under the watchful eyes of the gods. This idea of heaven was not abstract or otherworldly, but deeply familiar, rooted in the blessings Egyptians already experienced in life. Death, therefore, was not an escape from the world, but a continuation of it, elevated to perfection for those who lived in harmony with man. For modern audiences, the Egyptian afterlife offers profound insight into how one of the world's oldest civilizations grappled with universal human concerns. Their vision combined awe-inspiring imagery with a clear moral framework, making the afterlife both a cosmic mystery and a deeply personal journey. Unlike some traditions where death meant finality or punishment, the Egyptians saw it as an opportunity for renewal, resurrection, and eternal joy, provided one lived rightly. This optimistic view may explain why Egyptian civilization endured for millennia, its people bound by shared rituals and a collective hope in the justice of the gods. Ultimately, the mythology of the afterlife reinforced every aspect of Egyptian society, from its monumental architecture to its daily ethical choices. It gave meaning to suffering, offered hope in the face of mortality, and connected each individual life to the eternal cycles of the cosmos. To walk in truth, to honor the gods, and to respect man was not just the path to a good life, but the key to eternal existence in a paradise shaped by divine order. In this way, the afterlife was not merely an end, but the most important continuation of the Egyptian story. A story written in the stars, the Nile, and the very hearts of its people. When we step back from the grand temples, towering pyramids, and mythic tales of gods battling for cosmic supremacy, it becomes clear that mythology was not confined to Egypt's priests and pharaohs alone. It permeated the daily lives of ordinary Egyptians, shaping their festivals, their rituals, and even the most mundane acts of existence. Religion and myth were inseparable from the rhythm of daily life, offering structure, comfort, and a sense of belonging in a world where the Nile's annual flood, the rise of the sun, and the inevitability of death all demanded explanation. Egyptian mythology was not only about understanding the divine, it was about living in harmony with it every day. For the average Egyptian, devotion often began at home. Small household shrines were common, where families offered prayers and food to protective deities like Bes, the dwarf god who guarded children and mothers, or Taweret, the hippo goddess of childbirth. These figures were not distant or abstract. They were intimate guardians who watched over hearth and home, ensuring safety in the most personal aspects of life. Amulets inscribed with the Eye of Horus or scarabs representing rebirth were worn by both rich and poor, believed to provide divine protection against misfortune. In these ways, mythology was not lofty philosophy, but a practical force woven into the fabric of existence. The cycle of festivals revealed another layer of this cultural devotion. The Egyptian calendar was punctuated by great celebrations dedicated to the gods, each carrying deep symbolic meaning. The Apet festival in Thebes, for example, honored Ammon, Mut, and Khonsu, the Theban triad. During this grand event, the statue of Ammon was carried in procession from Karnak to Luxor, symbolizing the renewal of kingship and divine favor. Ordinary citizens lined the streets, singing hymns and joining in communal feasting. Similarly, the festival of Osiris at Abydos reenacted the god's death and resurrection, a ritual drama that reminded participants of the eternal cycle of life and the promise of rebirth. For Egyptians, these festivals were more than religious ceremonies. They were opportunities to renew cosmic balance, to connect with their gods, and to affirm their place in a greater order. Priests, of course, played a central role in mediating between gods and people. Unlike later religious traditions where priests preached sermons to congregations, Egyptian priests were primarily caretakers of the gods' images housed in temples. Each day, they performed rituals such as awakening the statue of the deity, dressing it in fine linens, and presenting offerings of food and incense. The belief was that maintaining the well-being of the gods' earthly representations ensured the prosperity of the land itself. Though most Egyptians never entered the inner sanctuaries of temples, the rituals performed there were believed to benefit everyone, linking the divine and human realms in a continuous exchange of care and reverence. Mythology also shaped how Egyptians approached art and architecture. Every carving, painting, and structure carried symbolic weight. Temples were designed as microcosms of the universe. Columns represented reeds along the Nile. Ceilings were painted with stars, and sanctuaries symbolized the primordial mound from which creation first emerged. In this way, stepping into a temple was akin to stepping into the moment of creation itself, reinforcing the connection between worship and the cosmic order. Even language carried sacred power. Hieroglyphs were not simply writing but words of the gods, believed to hold magical potency. To write a god's name was to invoke its presence, blurring the line between symbol and reality. For Egyptians, mythology provided a unifying narrative that connected personal experience to the vast expanse of time and eternity. Farmers understood the flooding Nile as the tears of Isis mourning Osiris. Soldiers marched into battle with amulets of Horus for protection. Families seeking fertility prayed to Hathor, goddess of love and motherhood. Death, too, was navigated through myth, with each person hoping to mirror Osiris's resurrection. This integration of divine stories into daily acts gave every Egyptian, regardless of status, a role within the sacred drama of existence. Even after Egypt fell under foreign rule, from Persians to Greeks and Romans, the power of its mythology endured. The Greeks identified Isis with Demeter and Horus with Apollo, absorbing Egyptian deities into their own pantheon. Roman emperors built temples to Isis across the Mediterranean, spreading her worship far beyond the Nile Valley. These myths, rooted in the desert sands, proved remarkably adaptable, continuing to inspire faith and fascination long after the decline of pharaonic rule. Today, the legacy of Egyptian mythology persists in countless ways. Modern psychology has drawn upon the archetypes of gods like Osiris and Horus. Literature, films, and popular culture frequently resurrect Egyptian deities, symbols, and stories, testifying to their timeless appeal. But perhaps the most enduring lesson is the Egyptian insistence that life and death, humanity and divinity, chaos and order, are all connected through a single eternal cycle. To honor truth, to live in harmony, and to recognize one's place within the grand design was, for the Egyptians, the key to a meaningful existence, both in this world and the next. In the end, the mythology of ancient Egypt was more than a collection of tales about gods and monsters. It was a world view that infused every act, from sowing grain to raising monuments, from welcoming a child into the world to guiding a soul into the afterlife. It bound the living and the dead, the ordinary and the divine, into a single story of balance, renewal, and hope. And, in that story, we glimpse not just the heart of Egyptian civilization, but a reflection of humanity's timeless quest to understand the mysteries of life itself.